Hi, I'm Kirby Dick, and I'm the director of The Invisible War.
Hi, and I'm Amy Ziering, and I'm the producer of Invisible War. And Kirby and I are going to be talking a bit about the making of the movie, some behind the scenes aspects, some filmmaking aspects, and also talk a bit more about the issue and particularly address some of the questions that we've been getting in Q&As.
Statistics are a very important part of the entire film. In fact, I know from talking to audiences that they often comment on the statistics making an incredible impact on them. I mean, the audiences and the public is just not aware of these numbers. What's interesting to me is that there's been actually very few studies done on this by the military, and I've often wondered if that was a deliberate choice on the part of the military, that by not doing studies, it's a way of keeping this information from the public.
Today, the latest weapons, coupled with the fighting skill of the American soldier, stand ready, on the alert all over the world.
One of our editors, Derek Boonstraw, came up with this opening sequence about using this stock footage, historically sort of marching you through the introduction of women in the military.
One of the things that was interesting is obviously you see how this perspective on women and the whole recruiting of women changes over time, but also underlying all of this is kind of an idealism that women are joining to be patriotic, to be a part of the military, and it's really a democratizing idea. And so this film, which is on a very dark subject, opens up in many ways in a very hopeful perspective, and I think that's in some ways what makes the revelations about the rape even more devastating, because we've started with this very idealistic montage. We had Bill White did our graphics. He's done the graphics for this film, Is Not Yet Rated and Outrage, and he came up with this idea of using ribbons, buttons, the material itself as the graphic background for titles really throughout most of the film, and it gave it a very personal feel. It wasn't just the iconography of the military or the graphic imagery of the military, but it was what these servicemen and women wore, and I think it made it more personal.
I'm not sure we'll ever be as lucky again to have this incredible dream team of executive producers who the only thing they asked of us or ever said was, how can we help? All of them in their own way had amazing strengths and passion and compassion. And I think that's reflected in the film. I mean, their energy, spirit, and intelligence and drive really is something that very much informed and shaped a great deal of this project from right before Sundance and certainly, well after.
Tanner King Barklow is our amazing, amazing producer. Tanner did incredible work in bringing a lot of the interview subjects to us, especially doing a lot of the heavy lifting on finding male subjects and finding all the investigators, JAGs. So Tanner was, a huge asset to this project.
Right, and this is the second time we worked with Tanner, and he's just incredible. He just brings all this intelligence to the project. In fact, he was the one who I remember right from the very beginning, we were talking about it, and he said, this is it, you got to make this film. And so I just said, okay, we're making it.
This was shot by Kirsten Johnson. She's a DP we've worked with for a very long time. She's really incredible, based in New York City. And we had her go out and shoot one of the New York City parades on Veterans Day.
Right, this was shot on two different New York City Veterans Day parades. I shot the first one, and then we asked Kirsten to go back and get shots of women marching, but also of these wonderful shots of girls watching. Again, this kind of idealism motif.
And I knew I didn't want to wait that long, so I had a friend tell me about
Most
the Coast
of the
Guard.
men and women that I spoke with that this really was for them a choice they made with great enthusiasm and conviction that this is the right thing to do and a desire to serve their country.
Well, really everyone who we interviewed really wanted a career in the military, and even now, even after this has happened, they still wish they had a career in the military.
And I think that's part of the reason why we've gotten such great response to the film, is that it really does try and reflect all the positive aspects that people experience being in the military.
We decided to make this film, I think, at the end of February 2010. And one of the first things we started looking for were survivors. It was a real challenge to find these subjects because, so many of them are agoraphobic. They oftentimes blame themselves. They have extreme PTSD symptoms, and they are really reluctant to talk about this. The last time they did talk about it, they experienced these incredible reprisals. We reached out to therapists, we reached out to victims advocates. Later on, we reached out to attorneys to find these people. And at the same time, we were researching through the internet, looking for either conversations about this in comment sections or on Facebook where people might say something to the effect of, I was in the military, when you talk about rape in the military, I personally know what you're talking about. And then Amy would reach out and see if they wanted to just speak to us off the record, and more often than not, these people had been assaulted in the military, and many times this is the first time they were really telling anybody.
Opted to go into the military.
I think once we'd gotten about 20 or 25 people that we thought might be right for the film, Amy and I took a cross-country trip, beginning in New York and driving to Los Angeles. Over a 10-day period, going into these people's homes all across the country, about 2 or 3 a day, and doing preliminary interviews with them. I would shoot, Amy would do the interviews, and it was a very intense experience because we just meet the people, and within a half hour, an hour, they're starting to tell us about the most traumatic experience of their lives. I mean, I remember coming out of those interviews and just being kind of blown away, very angry, very, very upset after each interview, just saying, we're going to make this film. But that took place, like I said, over about 10 days. And in my mind, it sort of set the kind of emotional basis for the film. I mean, I think when we were finished with that trip, we had a sense of the emotional material that we were working with. And even though we hadn't put it into form yet, I knew I had an idea that this was going to be an incredibly powerful film. I mean, these voices, all of them, each story could have been a film in itself.
Each interview sort of made us more and more committed every time we left someone's house to making the film that would live up to and honor and convey everything we had heard. I mean, that was really clear that we were more motivated than ever each time. And I remember Teresa, one of the women's houses we went to, maybe on the second or third day, she's in one of the montages, and as we were leaving, she said to me, Amy, even if you don't make this documentary, or even if you make this documentary, I'm not in it. Thank you so much for coming today, because you're the first person that's ever believed me.
I remember getting there.
For so many of these people, it was just so helpful that someone outside kind of reached out and cared about something that had been so damaging and devastating to them, but that they had felt so sort of personally forgotten and exiled.
And, kind of felt like a piece of meat on a slab at that point. And I never wanted to turn around and leave so much in my life, but I couldn't.
It was very interesting to shoot Corey and Rob and Shay. They're such a tight-knit family. I mean, you come in and you could pull out the camera and you could pretty much shoot anything. And I just actually was doing an interview yesterday, and I was asked, did you live with them for a long time? And no, we spent about 5 days, I think, with them, their house off and on. But there's a quality about Rob and Corey and Shay where it's just extremely welcoming in their house. So you can kind of hang out, and kind of half the time you're joking with them, and it has nothing to do with what you're filming, and they're always giving us shit, really. One of the things, there's this kind of dueling gift giving where Amy would give something to them and then they would feel like they had to give something back. And one of the times we were getting ready to go and they said, well, we've got a present for you, but we can't give it to you now because you can't take it on the plane. And we thought, well, what's that? And so we went back to Los Angeles, and a couple of weeks later we got this package with 2 gifts, one for Amy and one for me, and they were tasers, stun guns, right? They were tasers, and these are people who, are very comfortable around weapons. I don't have a taser or a weapon in my house.
The first time I met Corey, it was super cold in Ohio, and we're from LA, and I'm not good in the cold, and probably was not the most discreet about my unhappiness about the weather. And with them shooting all day, and it was, and then the next day when I showed up, Corey presented me with, she'd gone out after we'd left her house the night before and found a place that was open and bought me little packets of hand warmers and feet warmers. And I was sort of,
A, really happy, but B, completely mortified that here's this woman who can barely eat and
Go out in the cold.
has nightmares and can't go out in the cold, and she sort of like felt like she needed to take care of the producer from Hollywood.
She would always call you Miss Amy.
And she always called me Miss Amy. It was very sweet. So
The left side of my face. I remember holding the closet, thinking,
Amy did all the interviews with the survivors. She did a phenomenal job. I mean, I think she was able to really set up a very, very safe space with all of them, and that allowed them to not only go very deeply into how traumatic it was, but also go into the details, which can be very, very hard for these people to talk about unless they feel very safe.
a couple weeks later.
There was this one time where Amy, it was actually with Corey, where Corey broke down crying, and Amy got up from her seat and walked over and put her arms around her and said, "You're safe here, you're safe. No one will hurt you here." And later on, I think Corey said that in all the therapy that she'd ever done, no one had ever said that to her, and it really meant a great deal to her. This place right here where Corey takes, about 30 seconds to say that I've been raped, the reason it takes so long is this is the first time she's really ever said it to anybody outside of the people she reported it to on the base, because she had never spoken about it with her husband or with her mother. She had said she was assaulted, but she never told them she was raped. She really wanted to protect them because it's almost too much for both a mother and a husband really to bear in a lot of ways. And so when we were doing the interview, Rob was in the other room. He couldn't hear the interview. She never even told him. I think she told the whole story sometime later, which was about 4 or 5 months later after she'd gone to Washington and filed the lawsuit, and then there was all that publicity around that, and then Rob asked her about it. And I know it was difficult for him to hear, and it was also difficult for him that she didn't tell him, and that was something that they had to work through. I think we knew once we started interviewing Corey that she was going to be one of our main subjects. I remember when we left, we were there for a day, we interviewed Corey and Rob and her mom, and then I remember as we were driving away, we just said, yeah, we think she's going to be a main character, a main subject in the film.
It was my first time ever, and I've had a tough time convincing myself that I'm still a virgin.
If this is happening to me, surely I'm not the only one, in which I found out later going through the claims process.
The way the film was set up, we deliberately took about 10 or 12 minutes to get to here. We wanted the film to begin with this idealism, and we knew that if we began the film with this very downbeat, dark description, that audiences would we knew audiences were sort of primed to get to this anyway, and we thought that by presenting this idealism, this upbeat kind of presentation, it allowed them to settle in and prepare and be ready to hear this, something that they knew was coming. And it seemed to work. I mean, you could just see when you're watching audiences how when this montage started, this group of women speaking about their experiences, something that the audience knew was coming. They were ready and they settled in, and the film then from here on in took a very serious tone and direction.
Slammed my head against the concrete wall and very forcefully had sex with me.
I just went to my tent, pulled the sleeping bag over my head, and cried.
this was from a series of interviews Kirby and I did when we first started the film, and what we realized was we didn't want people to walk away and think we just had found 4 or 5 interesting subjects and followed their cases, but we really wanted people to feel the weight of the multitude of people that this has affected and the sheer numbers. We decided to cut these montages like choruses of all the various people we'd spoken with, and so you get really a sense of the incredible magnitude from all different branches represented in different ages.
Women had been sexually assaulted so far in the U.S. military. If you take into account that women don't report because of the extreme retaliation, and that was,
the fact that these numbers had come out more than 20 years ago, the fact that this had been covered up for so long is one of the reasons we made the film. But I'm still astounded that the military and the entire country didn't respond to this a generation ago.
Women and men reported assault in the last fiscal year.
I knew it was very helpful in getting the film made. We actually filmed her testifying before Congress, one of our earliest shoots, and she really helped give us a perspective all the way through on this issue. You know, her organization, SWAN, has been on the ground on this for many, many years, and it's been doing amazing work in Congress, so she was extremely helpful. Corey's collection of meds there is not uncommon. I mean, you go into any medicine cabinet of pretty much any one of our subjects, and they're just completely overprescribed medication. In fact, one person you spoke with,
she was just showing me her arsenal of medications, and I said, so what's your therapist plan? You know, so you've been on this for 3 years, sort of taking about 25 pills a day. What are you guys working towards? And she looked at me like that was the most bizarre question she'd ever heard. And I realized at that moment that there was no plan, that this was the plan, that she was sort of, you know, to be permanently medicated.
It was really heartbreaking to see these people who just, you know, being prescribed these meds that not only wasn't dealing with the underlying problem, but also in many ways
turn them into incapacitated zombies. I mean, it's just sort of like The Walking Dead. Honestly, it was just scary. But I'm really hoping that the film will get seen by people at the VA, and they'll start kind of trying to really more aggressively rethink the sort of first stop pharmaceutical approach to veteran ailments.
That I used to eat, everything is mashed potatoes, Jell-O.
This was something that just blew my mind when Corey said that.
Right, when we'd go out to eat, she'd order mashed potatoes or something like that. That was all. And I think that was the time we realized the physical impact of this assault. You know, I mean, this is 5 years later and she's still not getting treated.
Rob and Shay go outside. When it's really cold, it's like my jaw will just lock up.
This is shot by Corey, this footage here. So she is inside, you know, watching Rob and Shay playing outside when it's cold.
We are sorry, but due to a large volume of calls and unusually long wait times, counselors are unable to answer your call at this time. Please stay on the line as calls will be answered in the order received.
I actually think that this is, in some ways, the best visualization, if you will, of the problems that veterans are facing. I mean, not only veterans who've been assaulted, but also men and women coming back from the war zones with PTSD. I mean, this is very common for people to spend years, several of our subjects, decades, trying to get the benefits they deserve. And some still are even trying to get them. And then with Ariana, I mean...
Well, Ariana was one of our last interviews, and we met her, and sure enough, like everybody else, she reported that she was on this incredible arsenal of medications. And I could see she was very fragile and rattled, and I could see their effect on her, you know, in talking with her, and she didn't seem at all in a really healthy place psychologically. And so because I just was so sort of fed up and disgusted by what firsthand witnessed for the past 2 years, sort of gingerly suggested to her that, and also she reported to us that, you know, she was Division I soccer and has sort of been on a pre-Olympic team to play soccer. And, you know, I knew she was sort of this incredible physical specimen, this like sort of, you know, real thoroughbred. And so I just sort of gingerly suggested that maybe she'd go off her meds and just sort of go back to running, which I said would really actually be a more healthy way to work through what she'd gone through. And it's an antidepressant, it's a de-stressor. And she she heard that, and, you know, she said no one had ever sort of suggested that, and she really took it to heart. And then a week later called me and said that she'd gone off cold turkey and had been running again and was, you know, and had never felt better. Kirby was just alarmed because he sort of was worried that, you know, what if she started getting suicidal again or something like that, or we were overstepping our bounds, etc. But I just couldn't bear it anymore.
Both my dad and my brother are prior Navy, and
This was Hannah, and I remember calling her, and she was extremely sweet on the phone, and I asked her about her background, and she said, I was from a military family, and my dad's career military, and I just so loved the military and her father as well. And so I said, I'd love to speak with him, and she said, well, he's currently...
Well, he was in the Army National Guard.
And he probably could talk to us off the record only. And we had this incredible conversation on the phone, and I said, we'd love to film your daughter, but we'd also love to film you, obviously, because it's very helpful and compelling for the audience to see, you know, the family's perspective on this and how it's impacted them. And he said, well, I can't, you know, I don't think I'd get permission if I asked, so I don't think I can talk to you on camera, but I'd like to be there the weekend you shoot Hannah, because it's really important for me to be there for
to be of support, so please let me know. I'm shipping out to Iraq in a month, but any weekend in the next month would probably be okay. So we set up a time and flew out because we wanted to see him before he shipped off. And when we got to the house, he opened the door and he was dressed as you see him in his interview, in full military attire. And he said to me, you know, I changed my mind. You can shoot me. Let him come after me. It's my daughter, and this is more important. And so that was pretty incredible, and we ended up shooting that on-camera interview with him, which, as you see, is so emotional. And I think it's cited to us over and over again as one of the more searing moments for people in the film.
Right, he was unequivocal about wanting to speak, but we were concerned he might be court-martialed, there could be, I mean, he was over in Iraq, what kind of repercussions he might experience. But so far, I think everything has been fine.
I mean, we did think about it strategically, and we thought, well, the only protection or cover is when the film comes out, if we do a good job, it'd be very hard for them to really go after him. After seeing the film, you're not really going to want to court-martial this guy. So we were, though, very, very careful, much more so than when any other film, especially when applying, you know, when we had to send the cut into Sundance. I remember calling them several times and saying, look, I know it's sort of convention to hand these things around. You've got, you know, a new film, and but this DVD really can't go out of your hands because, you know, we really can't have a lot of these people in our film really can't be exposed publicly until the film really is exposed to the public, so that nothing could happen to them, you know, or we wouldn't have to be told to take footage out of our film, etc. So we were also, you know, careful and conscious because he didn't have permission, that we had to be very careful before the film was publicly released that it didn't get circulated very widely.
Another real challenging thing about finding subjects for the film was to find all these people that had been in the military law enforcement system, whether, you know, Stace Nelson, NCIS, former JAG officers, current Army trainers who trained investigators. And this is part of the whole issue around this cover-up, is that people in the military are very reluctant to speak ill of the military. Some of them, I think, are even concerned about their pensions, although I don't know if that's a legitimate concern or not. But so it was very hard to get people to speak on the record about what was going on, even though off the record we talked to people who were either in the military system or civilians who worked very closely with the military on this issue and knew the extent of this problem. But they were very, very unwilling. And so you talk to them off the record and they just excoriate the military. And then so we'd say, great, you'll be a great interview. We'd fly them in, we'd interview them, and then they'd be much, much more cautious. And then the interview's over, and then they'd go back to this real strong critique of the military. So what we had to do is, again, and working through the internet, and this was Tanner Barkla who came up with these people, our producer. I don't think there's these kind of people, really certainly this array of people who have experience in the legal system of the military, has ever been interviewed before like this in an article or anything, really. And I think this gave a perspective that I felt was really, really important. And I think it's also what makes the film very unimpeachable, is you have people who've seen it from the inside talking about their experiences.
Given specific training and continual training to our NCIS, Navy Criminal Investigative Service, those investigators on how best to respond and to investigate those crimes.
She's actually still talking about wanting to go back in, though, now, actually. I think back into Army National Guard now.
Well, a lot of them would love to. They just, you know, it's really a shame, and there really is no need. Ironically, I mean, women that get raped in civilian life don't necessarily leave their jobs, but I think pretty much everyone in if things had been handled correctly, I think Corey would still be in, Trina would still happily be in. I mean, if the incident had been, you know, taken seriously and the people prosecuted and the women supported, it doesn't have to be this debilitating trauma that leads to life exile from your career choice. That's ridiculous. You know, bad things happen in the workplace, but it doesn't mean you need to then leave the workplace.
Hear again and again from soldiers who have been raped is that as bad as it was being raped, what was as bad, if not worse, was to receive professional retaliation in their chosen career merely because they were raped.
When you report something, you better be prepared for the repercussions.
If a man gets accused of rape, it's a setup. The woman's lying. I could choose to report it, but if I wasn't, if they found that what I was saying wasn't to be truthful, then that I would be reduced.
A nice thing that we found and we were hopeful about is that it's really been a surprisingly effective healing tool. Just the experience of watching the film we found has been transformative time and time again. I just got an email, in fact, this morning from someone who said, thank you. She's, it's actually Allison Gill, and she sent me an email to say, I can't tell you how therapeutic it has been being part of this film and part of this process. And we also hear that time and again when the film screens at festivals, survivors come, they hear about it, and then they come up to me afterwards and, say, thank you for making this. I feel like now I have a voice. I'm not invisible. I feel more validated. I don't feel so strange. A lot of things more make sense to me, or you told my story up there.
What happens is, so many of these survivors, they're not in the film, they've just heard about the film, they come to see it. And I think what happens is oftentimes these people, are blaming themselves or are ashamed of what happened. And then they see the film and they realize that, no, it didn't just happen to them or a few people, it happened to hundreds of thousands of people. And most of these assaults were committed by serial perpetrators that had groomed their victims, just like perhaps they'd been groomed. And so then they realized that they were, that it wasn't their fault. And I think that it just really takes a huge load off them. And then, so many of our subjects too, I mean, even the interviews, just the act of doing the interviews seemed to have been very cathartic for them.
I don't think there's one case where any of our subjects, all of our subjects said that we were worried, and we'd gotten sort of a lot of counsel about being very careful about doing these interviews. Also, we gotten counsel from therapists about be careful showing the film to survivors. You don't want to trigger them. And I think we took that to heart, of course, and we're extremely careful and deliberate and thoughtful about how we went about everything. And we're just gratified that it worked out, that people across the boards all find it, even the survivors, even when they recounted to me like these horrible stories, for them, they described the experience later as, it lightened their load, and it wasn't re-traumatizing. It was actually a working through of the issue for them and got them to a better place afterwards.
This goes everywhere with me, and then this goes everywhere with me. You always have protection with Jesus, but sometimes you need just a little bit more.
I love you. After the film came out, I think Newsweek did a review, right, Kirby? And they said that Rob was the most compassionate husband in America or something. And it really was amazing to see, and you see in this scene just how much of a devoted, attentive, and inexhaustible caregiver Rob always is for Corey.
Yes, Rob, Corey, and their daughter Shay always go together wherever they go.
Team McDonald.
That's how they refer to themselves.
How'd it go?
It went good. Of course, they ordered a back X-ray instead of a face X-ray. But here's some makeup. You should have.
It was interesting. Speaking of the whole editing process, we worked with two editors, and Derek Boonstra sort of did the initial editing and did a phenomenal job coming into sort of raw material, which in many ways can be the most challenging. How do you shape this stuff? But there were so many key scenes. I mean, in many ways, the opening 10 minutes was initially shaped by him and cut by him. And then Doug Blush was sort of handed over. Doug had worked with Derek before, so they were kind of used to this process. And Doug came in and helped put the whole thing into this, I think, really emotional shape. I mean, he's a very interesting editor because he sort of edits like a musician, like a jazz musician in a way. I was trained just through working with editors, sort of count frames and spacing and things like that. And so you'd watch him cut. He just sort of listens and drops something. And at first, when I was cutting with him on Outrage, I was like, how can you do that? I mean, maybe don't you know if you're 3 frames off or not? And he said, well, no, this is the way I cut. And then what I've seen by that is it's actually a more soulful way of cutting. There's more of an emotion or an intuitive feel to the cutting as opposed to a precision. And it's, I think it was really suited for this material. Of all the nightmarish situations, this might be the most nightmarish because she's completely isolated on this island. And it's really a gang of men and at least one woman, most of whom are associated with the military police. They even tried to kill her. They threw her in the Bering Sea. All these people left the military, as far as we know, with honorable discharges. I asked her how many people she thought this gang of people may have assaulted, and she said, you know, it could have been a couple of dozen women on this island.
And that went on repeatedly. You had to call an operator to get a line off base, so they listened to your phone.
Most of these assaults are being done by serial perpetrators who are assaulting again and again. And once we'd heard this motif of a serial perpetrator and how they set up their victims, you could tell very early on when we were interviewing somebody new that they were getting set up by a serial perpetrator, because here they are, they're in a unit where they've just come into this unit. The perpetrator's there. These people are probably going through for about 6 weeks. They're getting training. The woman is just very isolated. She has no friends. So somebody who's a higher rank, one of these serial perpetrators comes to her and says, look, I'll help you, I'll be your friend. And so she's so grateful that, that she has a friend, somebody who's, has more power, higher ranking, can kind of show her the ropes, that they become close. And then even though they're not having a sexual relationship, and then they go out, they're drinking, and the serial perpetrator will, kind of make a pass at her, and she'll push him away, and she's not angry at him really. I mean, he's a friend, he's a good friend, but she just says, no, we're not going there. And then later on, when she's assaulted and raped, and if she comes forward and reports, the perp will just say, look, we were in public, we were making out. She's just, she just doesn't, she's just crying, false rape. And so this was something that these perpetrators would very strategically do over and over and over. They pick their victims, groom them, and then do it again. When a new crop of young recruits came through, they'd pick another victim and do it again. And this is something the military has to have known about, but they haven't acted on this. They're enemies within. They're really destroying the fighting force from within. The military has yet to go after these people and investigate and prosecute and incarcerate them with the same will that it engages in a war. I mean, this is, like I said, these are enemies within, and until they come out and say, we have this problem, we're going to get these people, I don't think you're going to see the real significant changes that you need to see for this problem to be dealt with. This is something that, most men in the military are horrified by this assault. I mean, we know from talking to people. I mean, most of these assaults are caused by a small percentage of serial perpetrators, but most men do not want this. And they want a military that is completely free of this. And that's one of the reasons I'm really kind of hopeful. If the military institutes this campaign, they have a force that is, I think, very ready to embrace it.
And it's a real opportunity for the military. I mean, what we're hoping is they hear this critique, they don't resist it, and they really earnestly say, take this as an opportunity to step up and address this issue with a real seriousness of purpose and intent equal to that which they take on to address, perceived threats from without. They really take on addressing this threat from within. That's really, having an incredibly deleterious effect on our armed services and as a national security issue.
Right. These serial perpetrators are really enemies within. I mean, they're decimating the fighting force. And with the military, the DOD has to do is it has to go after these men, these serial perpetrators, and investigate, prosecute, and incarcerate them. And it has to go after them with the same will that it fights a war. I mean, because this is a national security issue. These are enemies within. It also has to really focus on this issue of reprisals. It has to, so many, less than 15% of assaults are reported. And the reason for that is women when they're assaulted, they're advised by people who've gone through this, who've been in the military, don't report, because if you do, it could be the end of your career. The military will turn on you. And so the Department of Defense has to set up a system where it encourages people to report. It protects them. It goes after the perpetrator. And until it does that, this will continue to be a problem.
You're gonna go protect me, Mitch?
Trina and Amy described all the, I mean, she had lived alone most of her life, and then moving in with Amy, she had to sort of train the family and explain to them all the different ways they had to behave in order for her to not be triggered. And so that was sort of sad. You know, there's signs everywhere, knock, and you know, they were just young kids when she moved in, so they would just barge in and she'd start, you know, she'd go off and stuff. So it was really, you know, they love her, but it was very bit, you know, it's really unfair, you know, what this does to everybody. I've had quite a number of women say to me that they wish they had just had PTSD and not MST, or military sexual trauma, because they also said that there's a social stigma around MST that there isn't really around PTSD, that it's somewhat more acceptable or have trauma from combat, or even more noble. But it's even more marginalizing to have to explain that you have trauma from a sexual assault. It doesn't sort of hold the same cachet, respect, understanding, or acknowledgement in the public consciousness.
The problem is that anybody can be a victim of sexual assault.
I joined the service in 1972. The military.
Mike has, you know, particularly since the film has come out, he's been very, you know, very prominent spokesperson on this issue. Mike and his wife Jerry Lynn they're actually making a film, I think, right now on male military sexual assault.
Yeah, Mike was great. I mean, it was really hard for us to find male subjects who would speak on camera. He and his wife, Jerry Lynn, you know, flew out and were so gracious. And, you know, as you can see, they just are an incredible team, and they spoke, you know, so movingly and compellingly. They were just both great subjects, and just we were very grateful for Mike for his candor and honesty and courage. The rape of men in the military is something you and I discussed a lot, Kirby. Remember, at the start we weren't sure, you know, what focus the film should take. Should it address, you know, the broad spectrum and men and women equally, or just women, or men to some degree? Remember, we had all long discussions about it. And what was your kind of thinking ultimately?
Well, I think, you know, we both thought that it's hard enough for an audience to watch a film about women being raped, and it's even harder to watch a film about men being raped. Obviously, men and women are raped equally in the military, so our thought was that focusing more on women would bring more audiences to it. They would become aware of the issue, and then as part of that, we would obviously focus on male rape. And it was a foot in the door, if you will. It was just a way of getting this information in front of people, knowing that once it was in front of people, people would start putting pressure on the military about this. People within the military would be responding to this. And if the military makes the changes it needs to make, it will make them equally for men and women.
Across the board.
Across the board.
Men will benefit as well.
Yeah, and then of course the impact on men is so profound. I mean, yeah, and then of course the impact on men is so profound. I mean, you know, it was a real challenge finding men, and you know, the reason is that the men, even more so than the women, bury this, and many of the men that we encountered, most of them, I think, took decades really before they even would come forward and talk about this. When we did finally, it took a while. When we finally found these men, then one of our producers, Tanner Barklow, did his own cross-country trip where he drove cross-country and I think interviewed about 7 or 8 of them, and in pre-interviews. And I remember seeing them. I mean, they're all incredibly affecting, but I just remember seeing the original interview that he did with Mike Matthews, and it was, I mean, it was so, I mean, I remember watching it alone and actually just crying. I mean, I was so, combination of just so touched and angry at just hearing this story.
About what happened.
Helen Benedict was how we first found out about the issue. We read an article where she wrote about sort of how extensive the problem was in Ceylon, and we were very surprised. We were aware of, obviously, Tailhook and the Air Force Academy, but I think like the rest of the public, we saw them as, yeah, we knew there were very serious problems there, but we just thought they were isolated to those particular situations.
And what we wanted the film to do was to show that it's actually an ongoing, systemic, institutionally supported and covered up. We were really hoping is that people will stay interested even when it's not these glaring cases, but when they understand that it's just something ongoing, kind of like with the Catholic Church. And I really was sad when the film came out. You know, the Sandusky case was in the press, and I just saw it happening again where, you know, suddenly there's this incredible outcry about, you know, these, you know, absolutely horrible what went on at Penn State, obviously. But I was just puzzled by sort of why there's this outrage about that and sort of not a similar outrage about, you know, what goes on every day in the U.S. military. And we weren't, you know, or why issues like this can't get traction unless there's some sensational angle. Otherwise, people aren't particularly interested.
After finishing the film, I now even more people are coming to us saying, this has happened to us, this is happening to us, you know, I'm still in the military, you know, my assailant, I'm still working with my assailant. And the press still isn't responding to a lot of these stories.
I was getting pushed down to the floor and someone was reaching under my skirt, pulling my underwear off, and, you know, it was about maybe 30 or 40 feet of 200 guys trying to pull my clothes.
Paula was amazing. It was really interesting to reach out to her. She's now, I think she runs a yoga studio and is a yoga instructor and sort of seems to have found, you know, a level of peace in her life. And but she was extremely gracious and very game to sort of, you know, come out and do an interview. We flew her out to LA, and which was nice of her. You could have imagined her saying, you know, look, that part of my life's behind me and I've kind of moved on.
Yeah, and it was interesting because in some ways you're right, she'd put it behind her, but I think it was also very gratifying to her.
To protect the guilty.
You know, it's interesting, this, you know, history of these scandals. There's certainly another one right now as we're recording this commentary in July 2012, where quite a few men have been accused of harassment and sexual assault and in some cases rape at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. Even one of the generals down there has come forward and said, you know, this is localized, it's not a major problem, we have it under control, we're prosecuting the people that are you know, the assailants, and this is the kind of story that we heard about Aberdeen, about the Air Force Academy, about Tailhook. But again, another scandal erupting, and it looks like the military may not be responding the way they should.
12 years ago, the Tailhook...
It does astound me that a film, you know, this is the first feature-length film. It's pretty astounding, given that there are hundreds of thousands of men and women who have been assaulted.
Most of the service members are so debilitated by what's happened to them psychologically and physically that it doesn't sort of breed this community of activists. Most survivors of this crime are so busy just trying to sort of put their lives back together, you know, and sort of get through one day at a time, that they're not sort of leading a movement. And our hope is that now that there actually will be a shift in consciousness, that shift will lead to sort of the right kinds of pressures internally within the military and externally from the public onto the military and the administration to really have people want to own this and change it.
In fact, that's definitely already happened. I mean, we saw immediately after the film premiered at Sundance, the amount of press coverage, I think, probably increased at least fivefold on this subject, maybe 10 times. I think what this film has done is it has put this issue on the map. So that, I think, it's definitely changed after the film has come out. I mean, you know, perhaps before the film, maybe 10% of the public knew. Now I think it's, you know, I don't know, it's hard to speculate, but 25, 30, you know, maybe 40% of the public is aware of this as an issue.
Kind of sexual assaults in the military.
Marine Barracks, Washington. This was a real challenge to do a story on this because we came across this information very late in the process. We had this really very major story about just this incredible amount of harassment and sexual assault at the most prestigious base, Marine base in the world, in Washington, D.C., and the challenge was how to break this story in a documentary without the story getting out first. And it's a real challenge for documentary filmmakers because the post-process, the post-production process is so much longer that it's hard to get this information out without it being broken somewhere else. But we were able to do it, and this is, it's a very rare thing, I think, when a major story is broken in a documentary. Usually documentaries cover stories that have already been broken, and very rarely do they actually break the stories themselves.
What struck me was in talking to these women that they all said to me that they requested several times to be transferred back into combat to get out of Marine Barracks, Washington.
And they, one of them said that the harassment was worse than combat. We interviewed Ariana less than a year after she was raped, and gang raped, actually.
And right before she was going through the court-martial process.
Before she was going through the court-martial process. So she was, of all our subjects, she was closest to the experience and still very much living with this trauma, and it was very, very difficult for her and for her husband, Ben. The thing with Ariana was it was so intense when we were doing this interview. I mean, she was so much still in the throes of the experience of this. She had only spoken with Ben, and Ben had only spoken about with her, so it was just this real kind of, they were just kind of captured by this. I mean, their whole life had come to sort of a standstill because of this. I remember you were asking him these questions, and he couldn't even very simple questions, and he couldn't even speak about it because I think he was so, he's so overwhelmed by this and just the memory of this, and it was just, it consumed so much of their lives. And then finally, he kind of broke down, and you see this, and I think there was kind of a watershed experience for him, because then he was able to talk about it even though it was very painful. And later on, I guess just the experience of talking about it meant so much to him, because I think, he says that, after about he had obviously never spoken about this to his colleagues or anything. His colleagues, noticed how depressed he'd become, and it seemed like after he was able to get this off his chest and talk about it, he became sort of back to his old self.
The evening parades are what you would see on the news, the silent drill.
Elle is great. We, I called her up when we realized we were doing a Marine Barracks story, and she was immediately like, absolutely, I'd love to help. I remember she flew out on very short notice and did this incredible interview. She's, as you see, just extremely articulate and very poised, and, could talk about everything sort of quite clearly. And we were just really grateful to her, and she's been, super helpful after we finished the film and wanting to sort of continue to be actively helping others with this issue.
I was ordered to attend the drinking events.
My boss even said,
when I first talked to Ariana, she said, yes, I would I'd be very happy to talk with you, and I'm glad you're doing this, and people need to know. And I said, can I talk to your husband? And she said, well, you can, but he can't talk to you on the record because he's a captain in the military currently, and it's not something he thinks he would be able to get permission to go on record about, but he'd be happy to talk to you confidentially for your background research. So I called him up, we had this amazing conversation, and I, of course, asked, would you feel comfortable asking permission to talk? And he said, well, I don't really think they'd give me permission. I don't think I can do the on-camera interview, but thanks for asking. And then I called back a week later and said, here's what I'm thinking, since we're coming out anyways and interviewing Ariana, can we just interview you and don't sign the release? And you'll think about it, at least we'll have the interview, and then you'll think about it and you'll say, well, maybe you'll feel like it's something you want to go ask permission to do. So he said, that sounds fine. So we did come and do those interviews. They were pretty intense because of sort of the proximity of the incident and also the rawness that both of them had, because they really had only been sort of trying to work through all of this sort of amongst themselves and not really speaking a lot to others. I don't think Ben had spoken pretty much to anyone outside of Ariana about all he'd been going through. So we filmed the interview, and then we ended up cutting the sequence, and I sent it to them over Christmas. And I said, here's what we'd like to use. Ben, let us know if it's okay and you want to ask permission for us to use this. And if not, we absolutely understand and totally feel no pressure from us. We'll pull you out and we'll just use the Ariana. And he called me, I remember, like January 2nd, because we were sort of running down the clock to Sundance. We had to Sundance was like in 3 weeks, and we really had to lock picture and know what we were able to use of Ariana's story. And he said he thought about it very hard, and he decided he was going to resign, so that and he would file the papers that day so that they would be processed in time for it to clear before Sundance, so that we could go forward and include him in the film. And that was a very, very difficult decision for him to make. It was very bittersweet. We were happy as filmmakers to be able to use the footage, but we were very, very sad that he had to fake that kind of career choice, and because we knew of his deep love and desire to really serve, and that was his dream, and was really very sad that he had to give that dream up. But he felt that it was more important to speak out and to have the military be the best that it can be, and if this is his way of making it, if he can serve his country better this way, then he thought, well, then that's the way I'm going to do it.
He said that if I told anybody that he was going to have his friend Marv from Indiana kill me and throw me in a ditch, because that's how they took care of things in Indiana.
She went to war and gave 9 years of her life. And for them to take it.
The other thing is that's kind of shocking about this whole thing is that the chief of staff of the Marine Corps, the commandant of the Marine Corps, lives on this base, Marine Barracks, Washington. It's a very small base. It's it's sort of a couple of city blocks. It's not very large, and there's, I mean, does he know? Did he know? I don't know. He should have known. I mean, the commander obviously is on the base as well. I mean, these are the kind of things that are going on. The drinking, they've got to have known. This has been going on for years and years. I mean, Elle was in, it was 2006, when Ariana was in there, it was 2009, 2010. So for that entire period of time at least, there were these drinking binges that were going on. Yeah, this scene right here where he goes, kind of drops, he's so devastated that he drops below the frame, I think is, I don't know, for me is the most powerful kind of moment in the entire film.
Makes me the most angry is not even the
Maybe because I'm a man and I identify with it, I don't know. One of the things I think that a lot of people commented on is the men in the film, just the impact that this made on the spouses of these victims, and then also their courage to come forward and talk about this and be a part of the film, so it's not just women speaking.
And some people have said that they think it'll help augur a cultural shift, because here are strong, very macho men that are willing to sort of express themselves and cry and be emotional, and that doesn't diminish their sort of strength or respect or integrity that they command. And I thought that was interesting. That didn't occur to me. A reporter was talking about that.
That is interesting. I didn't thought about that. So many, I mean, when, even now though, when we go into groups, it's like oftentimes I'm the only man and there's one other man and it's all women, and I don't understand why, this isn't an issue that everybody's concerned about, why it's, rape is only a women's issue, even though it's not. I mean, even though more than half or more than half of the people in the military that are raped are men.
State prosecutors, local prosecutors that bring the perpetrator to justice. The problem with the military is that instead they have to go to their chain of command.
It was really a challenge raising money for the film. We had some early small funders came in, Funding Exchange. Maria Cuomo Cole came in at a very important point. But we only had really a small percentage of the budget, and we were committed. I mean, we were really committed to make this film no matter what it took. But as it went month after month, and we knew we were getting great material, we knew there'd been no film on this subject. We had a sense of how powerful the film was going to be. We have a really great track record. We just didn't understand why we weren't able to get this funding. I mean, we were turned down by multiple granting organizations that had given us grants in the past, and we didn't understand it. And there was a point, actually, where I was taking it very personally and getting angry, like, thinking to myself, this is an incredibly feminist film, maybe one of the most feminist films that are being made right now. Why isn't there interest? I think part of the reason is there's this kind of separation in this country between people who are focused on the military and people who aren't. And most of the money that's usually donated to documentaries comes from people who are not that interested in the military. And there's this very unfortunate division, which means that these kind of wrongs can continue. And then it kind of all changed at Good Pitch.
Yeah, it's this forum where you come and you pitch your film, you show your trailer, and the room is full of like sort of
NGOs,
funders.
nonprofits, and the idea is, looking for other, sort of helping a film find other sources of support, because, broadcast monies have so diminished and it's very hard for independent films to get funded. And we did our presentation and we showed our trailer, and from that we ended up getting all the funding we needed to make the film in time to debut at Sundance in January.
That was critical. One other funder that we did have was ITVS had come on, relatively sort of midway in the process, and Claire Aguilar, who's the head of programming there, was just such an amazing supporter of the film. I just remember, getting on the phone with her and sort of beginning to pitch the film, and then within 15 seconds she got it. She said, "Okay, I want to do it." I mean, it was just, or maybe within a minute. It was so quick. I've never had anybody say yes so quick, and it took a while for them to figure out how to come in, but
she was a staunch champion and defender.
To do whatever it is they want. And what is it that they do? First off, they drop 910 of them. They just don't do anything. Then of the 1,025...
Reading these these reports from the military, it was just, it was almost impossible to understand. Nobody could really decipher them, partially because halfway through they change from actual numbers to percentages. So when you're done, you have this comparison. You start with numbers and you end with percentages, and there's no way you can compare the two. And I think that that kind of obfuscation was deliberately done all the way through this 600-page report. So there's no way you can walk out with the essential numbers.
23 perpetrators, only 175 end up doing any jail time whatsoever.
I have been in Congress for 7 terms now, and every single term we have had meetings with DOD, and they come in and they confirm to us, we're going to be serious, we're going to take care of this, we're going to stop this, zero tolerance. But the rhetoric is not being turned into the reality of protecting our women and, in some cases, men in our military.
And they're like, but we have this SARC and SAPRO program. It's like, well, oh.
And Susan Avila Smith was another person that we contacted very early on and actually put us in contact with quite a number of our subjects. She was assaulted herself in the military, and since the 90s, she's been actually working with men and women. It's really interesting that there's these victim advocates like yourself around the country, like her, where they were raped in the military. And they just became experts and these advocates and in many ways, sort of therapists, just helping, these people that would come forward and looking for help, and, the government wasn't providing any.
Wait until she's sober. I mean, it's remarkable that that's allowed to pass in today's military.
We've implemented training at each and every level of military.
Kay Whitley, the fact that you have this woman who's really as clueless and as ineffectual as she was, the fact that she was there, really said, I think, volumes that the military didn't really take this issue seriously. And I think she, her kind of a grandmotherly demeanor, reporters would just sort of give up when the few times she'd be doing press conferences. I mean, she'd be so clueless and so sweet that they'd ask a few questions and they'd just give up. I mean, they shouldn't have given up, but I think that was a deliberate strategy to hire her because she would be able to sort of keep this cover-up going.
And in that strategy and in that training...
When we interviewed people in the Pentagon, Hertog and Whitley, Hertog had been in her job for about 2 months, so Whitley was no longer there, but they said, well, you can interview Hertog, but you can also interview Whitley as well. And we thought, oh, well, that's great, because no one had really, or very few people had actually done a real sit-down one-on-one interview with her. I'm, to this day, I have no idea why they offered her up, because they had actually protected her from interviews for such a long time.
20 slides. It's like a lot of military training where it's the once a year check in the box.
SAPRO can't fix anything.
People ask us how we got these. Well, we asked, and they were very happy to provide us with,
Yeah.
And all the money seems to...
They were very happy. Yeah, they were proud. They said, we were asking for video, and they said, here, we'll give you these. This is what they're proud of.
Well, it's just okay. I mean, it's coming from a place of, look, we care, we're doing something, but the problem was there wasn't an analysis of what they were doing.
Yourself, where's your buddy?
I didn't think I needed one.
I mean, the idea that you can't, on your own base, you can't walk home at night without being at risk of being assaulted is
No, but the problem
incredible.
But the problem is that the commercial turns it on her. It's her fault.
Right, and that's, yeah, well, I think it's both.
That prosecuted and imprisoned perpetrators, you would get rid of a lot of the rapes right away.
How would you
Since the film's release, General Hertog and
Colonel Montanus, the commander of Marine Barracks Washington.
yeah, both are no longer these positions.
Brigadier General Hertog, I think, has retired, and Colonel Montanus, I think, has been kicked upstairs to the Naval Academy. He's at the Naval Academy, and you know, actually, both of these people were removed. I mean, I think Hertog was retired a week before the film came out, and Colonel Montanus, the commander of Marine Barracks Washington, actually left the base the day the film opened. So, in theaters, right? So, you know, we can only assume that this choice was made by, you know, the military, so that these people were not, so that the press wouldn't start asking these people questions.
I noticed that Dr. Kay Whitley is not in her chair. Is it under your direction?
The film is very bipartisan. We feel that whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you're conservative or liberal, you know, we can all agree that we should be protecting the people that are protecting us. So we made a great effort to include clips of those members of Congress in the film, as well as likewise when we interviewed people individually, it was both conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats, and the whole scope in between. There have been, over the last few years, there's been quite a few champions of this issue trying to change the issue, and they have been able to make incremental changes. Congress yet, as a body, has not really responded and compelled the military to make the changes they need to make. And part of the reason is the military has so much power. In some ways, the Congress looks to the military and provide guidance on how to, you know, how the Congress should be regulating the military, which is a little bit backwards. But you know, we know that this film is being seen by many members of Congress, and when people see this film, it does activate them, it does enrage them, and also the Lackland scandal. Quite a few members of Congress are responding. Congresswoman Jackie Speer, Mike Turner, Congressman Mike Turner, Congresswoman Nikki Tsongas have all spoken out very, very strongly about this Lackland scandal and the lack of response from the military on this.
That's what you don't get. I don't want to talk about stuff, and you know that.
Yeah, well, that's the hard part. I don't know. I want to help you, but I don't know, you know?
But
I wanted to. I guess, yeah.
You can't help me. Like, that's the thing, is you can't. Sometimes I think when he has sex with me, is he thinking about, you know, me getting raped? Is he upset? Is he, you know?
Corey and Rob were just very willing to sort of go to the space of dealing with all the kind of emotional after effects of this assault and how it affected their relationships.
I'm not saying I don't appreciate you. You're gonna make me cry. Maybe this is why I don't express it to you, Rob, because it does upset me. Like when we almost split up because of stuff.
One thing I really hope that the film did get across was that the nature of the trauma is categorically different than any other kind of trauma for all these different reasons. Not only the assault, but really all the different aspects surrounding it that contribute to it being something extremely difficult for people to overcome. Its emotional, psychological impact.
Yeah, it seemed like almost every single subject that we spoke to, and that was, you know, over 100, or certainly the vast majority of them, had either seriously considered suicide or attempted suicide, some of them multiple times.
Brother, or the suspect as her brother.
It's akin to what happens in a family with incest. Because, you know, in the military, when we're functioning at our best in a cohesive unit, with brothers and sisters, you know, the band of brothers and sisters, I mean, we are family. When that bond of trust is violated,
The wound penetrates to the very most inner part of one's soul, one's psyche.
I have this folder that I keep. I have all my boot camp letters in it from my mom and my sister and people. And I was just going through some of this stuff, and I'm like, what's this? You know? And I open it up, and I'm like, oh my God, my suicide letter. Mom, I'm sorry for the grief that you must feel. Just because I'm gone physically doesn't mean I won't be there spiritually. I truly feel that God will take me without question.
She was just going through some old letters and saw her, found her suicide note. So she called us and said, I found this.
The way that she actually came across the suicide note is that, we were asking her to go through kind of all her old records to see if she had records of the court martial, other photos, everything. And so in the process of kind of opening up that whole file, she came across this suicide letter, which she'd forgotten about and certainly forgot she'd saved. And she actually couldn't read it. I mean, it was just very emotional for her just to find it. So she told us about it, and we said, okay, don't read it. Why don't you read it to us when we come back next on camera? So this is the first time she's actually reading this since she wrote the suicide note. And so that's why, one of the reasons it's, the whole experience of reading it was so traumatic. Actually, in this suicide montage, I mean, we could have added, obviously, quite a few more people speaking about suicide. In Mike, when he talks about the dog, it's one of the few times I catch myself laughing when I'm watching this film, where he tells about his change of mind when he looks at the perspective of the absurdity of killing a dog and then extends it to himself. This is just for him, just one of several different ways. Over, I think, several decades, he attempted to commit suicide. And each time he was really trying to kill himself. It just, I think one time he hung himself and something broke or bent.
You'll notice in the letter that she doesn't mention that she was sexually assaulted. She says, I can't tell you about the ways that I was trespassed. And that was also something that we noticed was not uncommon, that many survivors that we interviewed or were in contact with weren't able to fully disclose what had happened to them because of shame or fear of family values, being judged. In fact, when we interviewed Corey, that was the first time she had told people outside of the military immediate authorities that she needed to, that she had actually been raped. Her husband, Rob, didn't know, and her mom didn't know, her family didn't know until after we interviewed her.
It takes a different kind of action to cause change to come. And sometimes that's a lawsuit.
I grew up on military bases. My dad was career Army.
Susan Burke stumbled upon this issue as well herself through the media and through just reading articles, and decided that she felt compelled to do something about it, having come from a military family and really, like Kirby and I, just being appalled at the lack of anything really happening to help these people.
I mean, she's a real fighter for social justice causes. She represented victims of the Abu Ghraib incidents and Iraqi civilian victims of military contractors. She's been taking on the U.S. military and contractors for some time.
So Susan, undertook this first lawsuit, and now, since the film's come out, there's been a series of lawsuits in which she's hoping to use the legal system to sort of bring attention to this issue.
And what she hopes is, with filing these additional cases, is that one of them will get before a sympathetic judge and will be heard, and then that case will move up the legal system, the federal legal system, to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will overturn the Ferris Doctrine.
We actually finished the film 2 days before we premiered at Sundance, so it was sort of exciting when we actually had the premiere to see how an audience would respond, because we hadn't had time to sort of screen the finished version before any kind of public audience, before it first screened in public. And what was so incredible about that was it just worked. You could hear a pin drop, people were completely locked in, and at the end everybody spontaneously rose to their feet and were applauding and crying, and it was just incredibly intense moment. And I think it was even heightened because Corey and Rob were there, and Shay, their child. Ben and Ariana were there. Mila came. Mike Matthews and his wife Geraldine were there. Valine came. Valine Demos and her daughter were there. Kim, Valine and Kim. Jessica and her husband Scott were there, and Trina, of course, and Amy were there, and Trina's sons were there, and all of many of our executive producers, if not, a good number of our executive producers, I'm trying to think of, almost all were there as well. Mary J. Blige.
Senator Barbara Boxer, Representative Jackie Speer, Representative Mike Turner. So it was a very strong and interesting audience.
And then afterwards, we all were standing at the front, and people were coming down and, giving some of the survivors hugs and talking to them. And I was talking to people, and Geraldine Dreyfus came running in and said, Amy, you have to come out to the lobby. And she took my hand and pulled me away, and we went out into the lobby, and someone came up to us that Geraldine had been talking to and said, Amy, I just wanted to tell you that we're going to take care of that young lady. And I was like, I'm sorry. And he said, we want to pay for her surgery, for Corey's surgery, so that she doesn't have to suffer like this anymore. And another couple who this couple was friends with overheard and sort of walked over and said, we're helping too, count us in. And so I immediately turned around to grab Corey, and she happened just to be talking to someone behind me, and I pull her over, at which point this person says, no, we want to be anonymous, but it was sort of too late. So I said, Corey, you won't believe this, and he sort of said the same thing to her, and she, of course, immediately collapsed into tears in my arm, and I was crying, and it was pretty amazing, and just totally, no one had ever, Kirby and I certainly had never imagined that would have been something that the film would lead to have happening.
And then it seemed like it kept happening, right?
Oh yeah, we had by the end of April, we opened in January and April, we hadn't opened theatrically, but we'd been doing very small community screenings and sort of other private screenings of the film, and I would say more often than not, about 6 to 8 times, I had different people come up and say, how can I help Corey, and can I work to raise money, can I give money? Once we saw how powerful the film was at Sundance, not only were people coming up to us and saying, oh my God, how did I not know? They were also saying, what can I do? So Kirby and I said, okay, we have this really powerful advocacy tool, and it looks like it's motivating people to actually want to make change. What should we do? So we thought about it and thought that probably it would be most effective, given all the press we were receiving out of Sundance, to sort of harness and leverage that by setting up a series of what we called grass tops as opposed to grassroots. Grassroots is sort of widespread saturation of the community at large, and grass tops is sort of targeted screenings for media, influencers, policymakers, people high up in the high-level administrative jobs, congressional screenings on the Hill, etc. And sort of get people to sort of host a screening of this and invite their friends that are in these positions of more ostensible power to attend. We just through word of mouth, through leveraging the contacts of our executive producers, through leveraging people that just came up to me randomly at Sundance and said, I have connections, what can I do? We sort of set up this series of screenings. And in addition, we right away off the bat, because Senator Boxer and Congresswoman Spears and Congressman Mike Turner were extremely motivated, and they said, we want to do something right away. We set up a very big, impressive Capitol Hill screening that ended up being sponsored by 16 senators and 8 congresspersons, and bipartisan. That screening, in addition to all these other sort of grass top screenings, which are taking place in Los Angeles, New York, DC, San Francisco, all those things combined inevitably led to a word of mouth and a buzz and sort of pressure getting to high levels of the Pentagon and administration. And so Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta ended up seeing the film on a plane and ran into Jennifer Siebel Newsom a few weeks later at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Jennifer's one of our executive producers, and he said when he saw her, thank you so much for making this film. And I saw it, and I was extremely moved by it. And Jennifer then spoke at length with his chief of staff, and he sort of led her through the steps, and he said, yes, we watched it on the plane, and we were so, it had such an impact that it in part led the secretary to decide to hold a press conference 2 days later to announce these significant policy changes, which were much more substantial than anything we'd seen in the past. And then subsequent to that, President Obama issued a statement, which was pretty incredible, a press release commending Panetta's measures. And subsequent to that, the Joint Chiefs collectively issued a statement commending Panetta's measures. And so there was this ripple effect as well throughout the administration. And just anecdotally, we had a few screenings for generals. We also, in addition, part of the Grass Tops influencer screenings was targeted screenings for people within the military, obviously, and retired generals, etc. And we did often hear, and also from contacts we had within the Pentagon, that the film was definitely something that was on everyone's consciousness. They were certainly talking about it.
We met with one after screening it, and I mean, you could tell how, this extremely high-ranking retired general, you could tell how moved and kind of stunned he was by this. And I think, he said actually that seeing this film sort of helped him understand this issue better than all the sort of training briefs or briefing papers he'd gotten on this issue really throughout his career.
And I remember another retired general came up to me afterwards and sort of was speechless and looked at me and said, "Amy, I don't know if I'm more outraged or embarrassed."
It's interesting because we really expected that the response would be much more aggressive toward us. I mean, we were really prepared for blowback. We were prepared for the military to respond in the way that they sort of have always responded to this, which is initially to ignore it, then deny it, then try to discredit the victims who've come forward, and then say it's already been taken care of. It's no longer an issue. But they didn't. I mean, I think there was something about the film. I think there was something about Secretary Panetta himself, who I think is genuinely interested. But this has really made an impact, and we've heard anecdotally from really all levels that people are shifting money because of the impact the film has made. In fact, the military, quite a few branches are actually purchasing copies of the DVD to show as training. The top command levels of the National Guard are trying to have this seen by many, if not most, of the people within the National Guard. So the film itself is actually being used by the military to help address this issue. And I think that part of the reason for that is that they didn't really have any tools to show, the impact of this, the nature of it. There was really nothing out there. So we're really heartened that they're responding in this way.
And an interesting anecdote about that is that right when we got into Sundance, Sundance posted the trailer, and I immediately started getting these emails, which I was quite surprised by, from training from bases in Japan and Hawaii saying, "I saw the trailer, I'm now on my base and I don't have access to the internet, so I can't sort of download it or show it to people here. Can you just send me a DVD of your trailer?" Even that, I don't even need the movie, I just want something right now because I'm working on this issue on a daily basis and no one really understands it, and this would be so helpful for me to have. So we started just burning trailers and sending them around the country and overseas even.
Right, what you have is you have all these people, within the military who are working on this issue, who know how bad it is and want to try to change it and don't have the tools. So, I mean, even a trailer was a 2-minute trailer of the film was a tool for them that would help them, and certainly, the film as well. I mean, which is why they're ordering it.
Choka later told the press, "It's like they didn't care. It wasn't important. I wasn't important."
So we're eating at Bob Evans, and we overhear a girl talking about getting ready to go into the military. So
this scene in the diner, we were sitting and eating with Corey, and she was eating mashed potatoes and gravy because that's all she can eat, the soft foods. And she overheard this waitress talking to her to customers about, excited about going off, enlisting. And Corey just sort of spontaneously jumped up and decided she was going to go over and talk to her. And Kirby, that's why the camera's so odd, is he had the camera. We had a camera with us, so he just sort of put it there and sort of wanted to discreetly film. And we were sort of worried, is someone from the restaurant going to come over and tell us to stop? And we were worried, is he going to get the sound enough, etc. But it all...
Yeah, well, she had a radio mic on, but it was a full restaurant. So, there were people kind of watching me, and they were wondering, why was I shooting her? So we wanted to, what we didn't want is we didn't want, the customers, particularly that she was serving, to notice that this was being filmed.
Ruining your life.
Just the other day, I saw a girl running along the road that looked like she was about high school age.
This whole section here where these women and men, are talking about not letting their daughter go into the military or being very worried about that was a section that, some people have talked about with us, particularly women in the military who are, very supportive of the film. They also are concerned that perhaps this sends a message that women shouldn't serve. But what we thought it was important was to show that these people who came in with such idealism and such commitment to the military after this experience betrayal could not pass on that idealism to their children. And yet one more reason that the military really has to change this. And this issue of recruiting is important. I mean, now we're in an era of downsizing and recruiting isn't as important, but it's obvious they're losing incredible soldiers. And even now, after the film has come out, we get emails, people tell us, come up to me and said, well, my niece is going into the military, thinking about it. She absolutely has to see this film. And we're kind of in a quandary of how to respond, because we believe women should absolutely be in the military. They should be in all units of the military. But on the other hand, people should know what's going on. You have to know in order to protect yourself. And so just one more reason for the military to step up and address this problem.
So one thing we certainly don't want to do, the percentages of women in the military are rather low. Is it 15% now? 15%. And we want to see that increase and not decrease. So again, the insertion of "would you let your daughter" is really what we hope that critique could be heard. We are going to lose recruits because of this issue. We really need to take it seriously and step up and address it so that the service is a safe place for anyone who joins. And that's the spirit we wanted it to be in the film. So we get asked, like, how were you there? And I explained that what we knew, because Corey was making these frequent calls to the VA, we knew she was going to get, she called us and said, I'm going to get a letter. So we said, okay, great. When you get the letter, don't open, go out, look it in the mailbox, don't open it, and call us, and we'll send over our local camera person. And then, give him an hour or two, he'll come over, and then you can open it in front of him. And that's how we got this shot. So it is actually the letter, and the first time she opened it, and it's not that we were embedded in her house all the time, but that we set it up that she would, wait to open it until our local camera person could come over and over.
That's what the X-rays show. That's what Dr. Carco's letters show.
How can you deny medical?
So people are always curious and asking us, how's Corey doing? How are they doing? And the great news is that they recently had a baby boy, Cade. So now it's Team McDonald has expanded to a healthy, happy foursome. So we spoke with Ariana, and this was at the lowest point of her life. But the thing that's really been great and amazing is that she's really in an incredibly better place right now. She's, gotten off all the medication. She's, running every day and eating really well, and has a great job at a nonprofit, which has a lot of responsibilities, right in D.C., and has really, productively and successfully sort of worked through the trauma and is trying to reintegrate back into daily life, and has achieved that to a great extent.
I know. I feel the same way, Shay.
We recently heard from Jessica that the VA is actually threatening to cut off her benefits, and she was really upset and alarmed. And we put her in touch with Susan Burke, who has decided to help her out on this, to advise her, because this is, we don't know if this is any kind of retribution or not. We have no evidence that it is. Although I think there was some reference in the denial letter that something to the effect of, and this is not a quote, but, given your perspective on this issue or something like that. So it led some people to believe that there might be some...
That's crazy. I never heard that.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Something like that. Yeah, again, I don't know. Yeah.
Wow.
Same thing with Mike. Mike experienced something similar where Mike Matthews, where benefits were taken away, and
After the film came out?
yes, after the film came out, and now they've been reinstated. Yes, but again, he seemed to think that there might be some retribution. I don't know, but these kind of things do happen.
We've really done a very good job there, and the credit goes to Dr.
And then Hertog, to her credit, she seemed genuinely concerned about this issue, but still there was a lot of the approach seemed off. Like, I think at one point during the interview, Amy asked her, well, have you ever sat down one-on-one with a survivor and spoken to a survivor? And she said, no, but I'd like to. And I mean, that's a game changer, to sit down with someone. I mean, you really understand, what they're going through when you get face to face and you understand all the issues. And I think that's in many ways what the film conveys to people. And the fact that this person who'd been in, at the head of the U.S. military sexual assault program had not actually sat down and spoken to a survivor one-on-one is just incredible to me.
Yeah, and the most astounding thing for me in talking when we did the interview with her was that she based her knowledge on firsthand personal experience. So if we said commanders have this conflict of interest, her response was, I've never seen that, I would never do that, therefore it does not exist. And I remember sort of being completely baffled by this. So Kirby was doing the interview and I was getting increasingly agitated. I was behind this curtain and I sort of said, well, have you ever been to the moon? And she was like, I said, because, how could, but you still believe it exists, so isn't it, by a leap of faith, can't you believe that the scenarios we're presenting could have some credibility? And I remember at this point, Kirby is like shooting me looks like daggers, we're going to get kicked out, shut up,
Well, we had a whole series of interviews to do. This was the first day, so we had a day and a half more of interviews to do. It just seemed to me that, it's the Pentagon, they can just kick you out on a moment's notice, obviously. And as far as the whole commander thing and from her own experience. I mean, if you've been in any kind of chain of command anywhere, you know that not all commanders do the right thing. I mean, that's...
And you also know there are conflicts of interest every step of the way. I mean, to assume that,
To say that every commander would do the right thing is just, it's incredible. I mean, it's such a, again, it's the military denying there's a problem when everyone knows that there is.
You can't go to your congressman to obtain justice for being raped. I mean, imagine how silly that is. Imagine if you told civilians that. Oh, gee, sorry you were raped. Go talk to your congressman?
I remember, interviewing Jessica because this was, it just seemed like the first time she'd really ever spoken about this to anybody. And she's so vulnerable.
This was very intense.
Yeah, this is, actually...
she broke down there and we stopped filming. Didn't we, I think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I like this. I like this little bit where your hair comes into the shot because it's this is a case where you hear a voice, you see your hair, and it just kind of breaks the fourth wall, and it reminds you of the sort of intensity of the actual interview as it's happening, as opposed to as you're watching in a theater and.
I don't even notice that. That's so funny.
You've never seen your hair go into that? Oh, no.
Do you think other people have, or just because you're a filmmaker? I've never noticed it. I'm so focused on her. That's so funny.
No. I think you might be right. But it's something that Doug, our editor, and I had numerous conversations about wanting to keep that in because we were thinking, well, do we push in on the shot and take it out? And we decided, no, let's keep it in. We've heard your voice. Yeah, the hair is just sort of part of this and.
But I do remember that we stopped filming. She really broke down at that point.
Yeah. It's interesting to watch how Amy is watching her and their relationship here. And you can see that Amy is kind of living through this experience with her and has been living through this experience with her for so long. And it's, this kind of very caring perspective on Trina.
That's a very sad moment. And it's a little sad that the only hope that someone can have is that the person randomly sees this and finally has to recognize what they've done.
Years and years and years.
The average sex offender in their lifetime has about 300 victims, and the vast majority of sex offenders will never be caught.
A lot of civilians see it as being a military problem, but it really isn't, because 5% or less of reported offenders are convicted. So almost none of them wind up on the sex offender registry.
People ask us about sometimes the difficulty of getting into the Pentagon and getting interviews in the Pentagon. Amy, you did most of that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Correct.
It took a long time to get these interviews, but it was mostly sort of just going through all the different bureaucratic steps and measures one had to take.
There were a lot of bureaucratic hoops that we had to go through and go from one department to another, and it was hard to tell who was finally making the decision. But when they finally said yes, then they were actually very accommodating.
They weren't antagonistic towards us. They scheduled us there for 2 full days.
It was very interesting to be in the Pentagon. I mean, I'd never been in the Pentagon before. You have a minder that obviously anywhere you go, if you have to go to the bathroom, somebody escorts you to the bathroom door. And inside the Pentagon also, they had these food courts and all these fast food outlets. I mean, we were sort of concerned because the quality of the food inside the Pentagon was pretty poor, right?
That was shocking. Another shocking revelation. I do not know how, our country is...
They should feed these people better.
They should feed these people a lot better. It was pretty dreary in there, and there's sort of no sophistication or awareness about the relationship of sort of being in fighting shape and what you put in your body. It was kind of...
And so, I mean, yeah, that was the most shocking thing, actually, I think, about the whole experience of making this film. Was how bad they ate in the Pentagon. But yeah, and then we also had a tour, which was
they showed us the embedded newsroom, and that's where, the CNN and the Fox News, and they all sort of sit in this big...
What it is each person has their own office that they, can do individual reporting from. So these people are all inside there. They're interacting with these people in the
Pentagon on a social basis and a friendly basis. And you can also see how effective it is for sort of universal messaging, right? I mean, if you have all the news, the main key mainstream media news outlets right there, and you're giving them one message, and then they're all going to go out in lockstep with that same piece of information, and it's an effective way to control the information.
For them to do a hard-hitting piece would antagonize the people that are around them every day, that they see every day. So
yeah, so there's sort of that unconscious, really effective social pressure.
To serve their country, they should be given that chance with respect.
This was very moving. We just. They all came to do the lawsuit and met each other in D.C. for the first time, and then they asked if there were any sites to see, and I rattled off different things they could go to, and they all said, oh, we'd like, I didn't know if that would appeal to them, but they said, actually, we would like to go to the Women's Memorial, and so we ended up filming it, and it ended up being this really nice closing to the film, which we didn't anticipate at the time. It was very, very, obviously you can imagine a very bittersweet experience for them. They were proud of their service and proud that women were being recognized and proud of all of those things, and yet, so deeply sad about the way it had turned out for them personally.
It's our national duty.
One of the questions we get at most screenings is, why didn't we show the names of the perpetrators? We knew who they were in many cases. In fact, we did a great deal of background research on this. Every time we got in touch with a subject, even if they weren't going to be a subject in the film, we asked them if they felt comfortable with giving them the information about their perpetrator and what they might know about them, and we set up this very extensive grid. May have been one of the most extensive grids on perpetrators of sexual assault in the military anywhere in the country. And so we did a lot of research and looked into this and gathered a lot of information, but in the end we decided not to list their names because we didn't want the film to end up focusing on these 5 or 6 people. It would be a very strong kind of narrative pull in the film if the film started moving toward finding out where these people are, tracking them down, perhaps even confronting them. We thought about that, but we decided in the end not to do it because we didn't want people walking away thinking, well, the film found those perpetrators and outed them, or didn't find them, and we have to focus on finding them. That's what's important. What we really were interested in is focusing on the systemic problem, not these individual 5 or 6 or 7 cases. The individuals that we were interested in focusing on were the people who could change this problem, the systemic problem, and that was the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the people on the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We wanted the viewer to walk away from this film thinking that those are the people who can change policy and should change policy. It's a great thing that Panetta did take the decision to investigate and prosecute away from unit commanders. But all he really did was move it up the chain of command to the level of colonel, which is important. I mean, that's certainly a major step. I actually didn't think we'd see that for years. But it's still within the chain of command. And the problem with that is that there's still an opportunity for all kinds of conflict of interest. And so what really has to be done, and this is really urgently important, it has to be moved outside of the chain of command. So an independent body or an independent arbiter is making the decision as to whether to investigate and whether to prosecute these crimes. This is the way it's done in every other justice system in this country. You can imagine a situation where there was, an accusation of police brutality or perhaps police raping a citizen. The police themselves, or even someone up the chain of command, doesn't make the decision whether to investigate and prosecute. It's somebody entirely out of that chain of command, the district attorney's office, who will make the decision. And that's what really needs to be done.
From where you stand.
So this ending, the idea was we asked, we talked to hundreds of survivors, and so we put out the call, would anyone like to send their photo in? Because even though we didn't maybe get them to be in the film itself, we'd like them to somehow be represented. So these photos, I think it's really moving, and I hope people understand that these are all photos from different people from different branches that had served and were assaulted.
One thing I do want to talk about is that as horrific as this situation is, and it's still really very, very much of a problem. I mean, even this last year, 19,000 men and women were assaulted, and those numbers haven't changed over the last 5 years. Right this moment is an incredible opportunity for the military. They can change this. They have changed similar kinds of problems before. They had an incredible problem with racism in the 40s and 50s and 60s. They were having extremely violent race riots, and they undertook to change this. They instituted a campaign to change this, and over a decade-long period, they were able to reduce racism so that it was actually less in the military than it was in civilian society. And not only was that good for the military, but when these men and women left the military, they took these values into society and passed it on to their children, friends, associates. And racism has declined in this society over the last 50 years, and I think the military deserves a fair amount of credit for that. It was their programs that started within the military that helped get passed through into society, and they can do the same thing with this issue. These men are very impressionable at 18 and 19. They're being taught a great number of values, and one of these values that they can be taught is respect for women. And then they too, when they leave the military, they will go out into the civilian world and pass that on to, again, their children and the rest of society. So the military could actually become a leader on this issue of sexual assault and respect for women. And sort of one of the hopes that I have is that 25 years from now, we'll look back and we'll see that misogyny has decreased in this society, and the military was a leader on it. It was the fact that the military undertook a campaign to change the climate within the military, and that got passed into civilian society.
All right, that about finishes our commentary for today. Thank you all for listening. For more information, feel free to go to our website, invisiblewarmovie.com. And also we have a Take Action website, which tells you different ways you can get involved, and that is notinvisible.org.